Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name's Leroy Barber, and I'm a short drive from here over in Atlanta, Georgia. Been there for about 15 years. Moved from Philadelphia, where I grew up. So 15 years. I'm trying to become a Southerner. I'm still. They're trying to let me in, but I got these Philly things about me, blowing a horn. You know. It was a funny story. One of my famous moments. Moved to Atlanta, straight from Philly. I'm in the car with the guy I'm going to be working in ministry with. He's born and raised in Atlanta, pure Southerner, right? And we're driving down the street, and I'm behind somebody, and they're not moving. And I'm like, eh. He goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Dude, he's in the way." He's like, "You don't do that here." I'm like, oh man, this is going to be a long time. How long is it? It's like, oh boy. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of everyday missions. My story is I was not looking to be a pastor. It was something that I was actually running away from. Although I grew up in a church, pastoring was not on the list of careers that I wanted to pursue. And that's probably why, because I was considering a career. Pastoring might be a little bit more of a calling, maybe, but we'll get into that too. But in process for me, church and community at some point in my life began to break down. I'm this guy growing up in church, in a Baptist church, kind of on the Baptist church, agenda of my church growing up there. So you become a junior deacon, you become a deacon. Like, you kind of move through this process. Anybody Baptist in here, you kind of know that, like how that happens, So I'm on this road, and probably in my mid-20s, the neighborhood where I lived was about 8 blocks from the church, and then the church was this thriving, wonderful place, friends, mentors, 1,200 people, growing church in a struggling part of Philadelphia, and the two didn't really go together, Like, there was church, and then there was home life, there was community. And I went through a little bit of crisis of faith during that time. Is this Jesus thing real? Like, if it doesn't affect people who I can see as I'm standing in the church, and it doesn't affect their lives across the street, what good is it? And so I went through a process there. And I'll kind of throw in and out during the day, kind of some of that process. But I didn't feel qualified to be anybody's pastor, to be anybody's missionary, to do any of those things. What does it mean to be a missionary? It was women in white dresses on Sunday morning, or missionary day 2 times a year where we had a missions offering, or it wasn't something that hit home until this crisis came into play. And all of a sudden, I felt God saying, "I want you to be a missionary right here in your own neighborhood." And what that means, and the process of that for me was pretty intense. Left my job probably 6 months after that I felt that call. 2-year-old daughter, and came home and said, "Honey, God is doing something, and I think I'm supposed to do my job." And I leave my work, and we start going out, doing stuff with the homeless every day for 3 or 4 years. Going downtown in Philadelphia, probably 6 to midnight, 6 to 11 o'clock, with my 2-year-old daughter when it started, and just giving out clothes and food and blankets and tracts. And that's how we started. Probably a year in, the whole tract thing fell apart because I'm giving the same piece of tracts over and over again. And it's like, they're like, "Hey, here's your food, here's your tract." And they're like, "Dude, you gave this one out 2 months ago." Yeah. So nothing against tracks, but as I started building relationships, they just didn't make any sense, right? And so what we had to opt to do was get to know people. So then all of a sudden we're sitting down and we're talking with homeless men and women every evening, getting to know their lives, looking at scriptures, praying together. It was almost like as these relationships developed, it was kind of like, hey, this discipleship process and this church and pastoring really for me began like on the streets of the Art Museum in freezing cold temperatures in Philadelphia. That's how my pastoring started. And from that point to now, it's been an incredible journey. Hopefully, I can share some of those things. So this idea of everyday missions is something that has taken me a while to come to, but I'm convinced now that some of what we do around the idea of missions and call is all wrong because we think it's a special thing, right? That you're set aside and you go to seminary and you get some paper or all of these things that we do to become missionaries and pastors, right? Like I know I'm at a seminary and I know like this is a bad place for this kind of thing, but I went to seminary too, so I'm not downing it, but I'm saying I was of this mindset of this was something special, and I've discovered that if we are going to make impact in the world, we need as many people as possible. Everybody thinking about their lives and their work as vocation and as call. And what is that? So for me, this summer I took a trip to Rome. And what came alive for me was Romans 12, 1 and 2 in this setting. So Rome represents all of these certain things. I went there and it was like, oh my gosh, when you start hearing the tours and hearing people talk, like this was the center of the world, the universe is how they felt about Rome. And you start hearing about all these emperors and gladiators, and you go down to the Colosseum and it's bigger than life, and they talk about where the emperors sat and all, like it was just like this place that represented power and humanity and secular humanity in a way that was like that was bigger than life to people. Also was this place where there was this humanity challenged divinity, right? That humanness was very important. Power was very important. Prestige was very important. Looking to the kings as God's rulers, right? That's what this place represented. And as I walked through there, I got that feeling. As you looked at the ruins now, but then those people thought they were in, like they could not be beaten, could not come down. So I go back to Romans and I start reading this idea of Paul, where he says, I beseech you, therefore, brothers and sisters, right, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves, right, as living sacrifice. He starts this deal and he says, in view of God's mercy, right? So Paul wanted to get back to Rome. Paul wanted to be this witness in Rome. He plants this church in that place, in this Mecca of sorts, in this place where kings rule, and in this place where the strong survive, right? Gladiators and all this. Paul says, now this place can be conquered as well, but here is how it's going to be done. First of all, it's done in view of God's mercy, right? So Paul takes up this idea, like, I was a murderer, man. I killed Christians. I was a part of this system, but yeah, like I haven't been consumed yet. Like for some reason, God has left me alive, has not consumed me. And earlier in Romans, he walks through this process, right? It's kind of an incredible process of man, the thing that I don't want to do, I wind up doing. That which I think I should do, like I never do, right? He walks us through this, and he winds up in this place. Oh, wretched man that I am. Who's going to free me from this body of sin? Right? You know, he winds up in that place. But then in Romans 8, he winds up in this place, and he goes, but this experience of Jesus, this love of God, has brought me to this place where I know that nothing can separate me from that. Right? So Paul, trying to figure out and feeling called to Rome, right? The center of the universe at the time. Right? Like the place of power of kings and conquerors and gladiators. How do we win this place? And he starts with this, he gets to this place of, first of all, like, we're going to do this in view of God's mercy. If you're called to anything, any work, any walk, any mission, it's in this view, right? It's in this view of, man, like, I'm here because of God. I've been called to God, right? By God. Like this idea, Paul says, I'm dying every single day because of what he does. Right? This idea that we forgive as we are forgiven. Right? We give as God has given to us. Who much is given, much is required. Right? This idea that we have been called, but we've been called through mercy. So Paul, in conquering the city, says, first thing is it's in view of God's mercy that I'm going to be. Then he steps on this idea of offering yourselves. I've been involved in this for about a little over 20 years. And now what I do, when people ask, hey, can Missioneer come here? Can you guys start a work here in our city? Can you? The first thing I ask them to do is I say, hey, let's go for a ride. We go for a ride in their city, and usually people try to make their city sound great, right? Sound good. Like, this is our city. Here's all of this, and I say, no. Like, take me to the place where nobody goes in your city. The place that people say, why would you live there? Why would you go there? Take me to that place. Now, everybody isn't called to this, possibly, but we go to the hardest places. The places where people think that God doesn't even dwell. And when we're in those places, the way to change these places, the only answer is an offering of ourselves. Like this idea that we go into a place. That, and I'll get to this later, the idea that we live among. What takes missions out of this special call to an everyday call is this idea of neighborhood. Right? This idea that I'm going to love my neighbors as I love myself. And in doing that, like, God will get glory. I got some examples of it. I'll get to it. But there's this invitation here that Paul puts out. Offer yourself. I beg you, I beseech you, please offer yourself to God. Like, in lieu of all that he's done for you, offer yourself to him. Like this great invitation to offer yourself. And for me, to offer myself. Now, there's also a part of this that I like to go back and pull it through kind of Jesus' voice. As Jesus called people, right? He calls his disciples and they drop everything and they come to him. But in John chapter 6, there's an interesting dialogue that happens. And in this dialogue, Jesus winds up asking the question to the disciples and to Peter and giving them an invitation to leave. As he's talking, people are leaving. And it says that some disciples left that moment and never returned. And then Jesus turns to his disciples and says, you two, are you going to leave? And he gives them an invitation to leave. And then it's Peter who speaks up, right? Peter says, where am I going? You got the key to eternal life. And we know in some other scriptures, Peter said, I've given up everything. I got nowhere to go. I'm going to give you all of me. Now, it's something significant in this offering of Peter. Because Peter's the dude who people wouldn't have picked for leadership. Peter's the dude who the Sanhedrin got mad at because he was ignorant in a sense. Right? As they saw that he, in Acts 4, they got mad because they realized that this was an ignorant man standing before them. So the significance of this offering, the significance of this is that everybody can offer. That there is no special call to being a neighbor. There's no special call, right, to living out the gospel in your everyday life. Now, I know we're studying it as pastors and teachers in a seminary. But if you're going to a hard place, which most places are hard, you're going to quickly learn as a pastor, I need everybody back. Whoever is willing to get in, for whoever so will, let them come. Let them serve. And then he talks about this as acceptable worship. This is interesting in the fact that he calls this worship, this offering of ourselves, this offering of our lives. The Message does this, translates this verse: take your everyday life, your eating and sleeping and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. So this idea that our worship is placing ourselves into God daily. Do with me whatever you want. And the fact that he calls it worship is pretty interesting, because we remember God being angry about worship back in Isaiah 58, right? Like, your worship is empty. Your fast days are for yourselves. All you do is come into this temple and offer fast days of worship for you. This is not the fast that I have chosen. The fast that I have chosen is to free the oppressed. Right? So we know there's a history of God getting angry at empty worship. That's only worship for ourselves. So worship takes on this different perspective. It is my life lived out where I live. It is my life seen by those around me in Rome. Why? I'm a little bit occupied with Rome because also, then he says, verse 2, he says, and I'll be through this really quickly. Verse 2, he says, don't conform to this world, but to the patterns of the kingdom. Right? Don't be conformed to this world. Be transformed by the renewing of the mind. He introduces new patterns of life through Jesus, right? So I write this term if somebody hits you, because where I was raised in Philly, my dad said, if somebody hits you, you hit them back. If somebody hits your brother, you better go down there and defend your brother, right? This idea of somebody do something to you, you do something back. Jesus turns that upside down when he says, oh, somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek. And let them slap the other one. Love your enemies. Do good to those that hate you. Right? This whole different pattern of life is introduced. Others first, this pattern. Hey, like, I'm not going to live for me. When I place myself as this offering, I'm going to live for my neighbor. I'm going to live for the other people around me, not myself. Right? Serving as a way of leadership. Jesus bowed down and he washes the disciples' feet. Right? And he says, unless you let me wash your feet, you can't see my kingdom. Unless you understand that this is how you serve. And this idea of community, that it is not all about me, all about our individual expression, but that it is a community expression. Let them be one. let them operate the way we operate, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So it's this surrounding. And then this idea of simplicity. Like, when did you and I have enough? And why were we given more? This idea of if we are privileged to have more, what does that mean? Does that mean that I stack up coffers for myself? Or does that mean I'm giving this to share? To whom much is given, much is required. So that's kind of the background, a little bit of this, where I'm coming from, this everyday missions. And then it's significant because now in today's society where you and I are serving, or where you and I will be pastors, or where we will be living, we live in a place the entire world is moving to the city. Right? We are in the midst of cities becoming the center of everything. Right? Some stats I got for you. Half of the world's population now live in cities. Right? But and in 20 years, that's going to double. Right? 80% of the U.S. population now lives in cities. And it was less than 10% in the 1900s. 50% of minorities, 50% of people of color now live in the suburbs. There's a demographic shift happening. That the world is moving to the cities. And one of the things that we ought to be mindful of as we're learning and as we're growing is that most likely you will be a pastor or serve in a city setting. Not in a rural setting, not in a suburban setting. And even if you're in a suburban setting, it's going to be a setting of diversity because poor people are moving out to the suburbs because of gentrification. So the world is becoming more diverse and moving into cities. What does that mean for churches? What does that mean for pastors? In fact, the church is probably the last place to integrate. It's holding the strongest stand on monoculturalism right now. Because we still say black church, white church, Hispanic church, native church. That's a part of our language. We're so far behind we don't even know it. And we're still, and I want to challenge those who are teaching at the seminary too. We're still teaching an old paradigm in many ways. The world is moving to become a city. That's the way it's outlined in Scripture anyway. It started with a garden and it ends where? In a city, the city of God. So there's something about city that in the big picture of things is where God is drawing us all to. And the fact that we still look at city and see city as a negative thing, as a bad thing, as an ugly thing, as a place I won't go to, as a place where the people I don't know. We're not setting ourselves up to engage the world. Gentrification is an American norm. It's not a great thing all the time. It's not a wonderful thing for those who are poor being relocated or displaced to other places around their city. But I've worked in 11 different cities around the country. And I'll tell you, every city is doing the same thing. The downtown areas are being gentrified, and that gentrification is starting to float out into the entire city. In Atlanta, every single government housing project has been torn down. There's not one standing. They're all gone. And there are spots of that all around the country. Most famous one in Chicago, Cabrini Green. Gone. Not there anymore. what are you and I as leaders in the church? What is our response to this? Something that's now normative in America. Where the wealthy will be downtown and the poor will be scattered. What's happening right now? You and I have to embrace missions and service in a different way. So it looks different. So 11 years ago, I planted a church in Atlanta, and I didn't want to be a pastor, like I said, started off saying, but this church, because we entered a neighborhood in the community, we moved in, and we saw our family as a ministry in and of itself to this neighborhood. If God is who He says He is, that if we commit to Him and commit our ways to Him, that this idea of the kingdom of the gospel will flow out of us and out of our family into our kingdom and the way into this neighborhood by the way we live. So we purposely kind of amp down the preaching rhetoric, and we amp up how we live our lives out with people. So holidays look like we will have something for the entire block. So Thanksgiving became not just something for just our family, but we invited kids who didn't have family or had no idea what sitting down at a dinner table looked like. Come over. We're going to cook, and we're going to sit down to a meal, and we're going to watch football as a family. When it's vacation time, there's one or two kids that go along with us. Because in some of these hard places, kids have no dads, no family situation, and they have no idea what that means. And what was happening is sometimes a couple of these kids would come to know Jesus, and they walk in the church, and the church would have these expectations of them. And they had no idea what they were talking about. And those people end up just walking out of the church because they didn't connect in to how the church was socialized. So imagine this, right? Like the message going out, some kids responding, they come into the church, and then the church sends them back out the door. Because there's all of this language and all this culture that's its own. I believe the church has been called an impact culture. And to live amongst people so that we know people and that people know us. And as they know us, the gospel message comes alive. I don't know how many of y'all are from the South, but I lived in Atlanta long enough to know now that everybody knows something about the Bible. Doesn't matter where you go. I was blown away when I listened to a radio station, and all of a sudden they just throw a gospel song in the middle of it. I'm like, what? Or the pressure in Atlanta as businessmen for if they're not Christians, they're on the outside. Like there is a Christian way of living in the South. But it's not playing out in people's lives. It's not playing out in the communities where we're existing. I live in a neighborhood where there's a church on every corner. Every corner, some two. And in both neighborhoods where I live, the first thing I did in both of those neighborhoods is to go around all the churches and to meet all the pastors and to see where everybody lives and to see everybody's commitment to the community. And the last community was a larger community, Eastlake. We met 100 pastors, a little over 100 pastors. One lived in the neighborhood. In this community where I am now, I think there's about 30 or 40. None live in the neighborhood. The church is disconnected from the neighborhood, the local church. They're like, I think I'm talking to all seminary folks. I hope so, mostly, because I want to push you to be a different kind of pastor. One that engages the world instead of separates yourself from the world based on your theology. Live your theology. Let your faith speak. We got the saying within Michigan that nobody really cares in this neighborhood about your theology. They do, however, care about your faith. They do, however, care. Like, why are you taking care of your children? What? Like, why aren't you cheating on your wife, Mr. Leroy? Like, why don't I hear y'all fighting and screaming and yelling at one another out in the streets? So while they could care less whether I baptize them, by immersion or I throw some water on their heads, they can like what does that mean? That means nothing. What comes to play is your life and your lifestyle. This is a call for you as pastors to make mission and call an everyday thing. Society is diversifying. It is moving into the city. The other thing I discovered when I moved to Atlanta was there were big, large churches, famous pastors who made decisions to get out of town. They left the city. Probably about 15 years ago, just when gentrification was starting. I don't want to see another generation of pastors out of touch. Other thing is the idea anymore. This everyday missions idea says that you cannot have all of your ministry like outside of the place where you're working. You need some people living there. Do you need everybody? Maybe not. But you need a significant portion of people living with. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So if Jesus couldn't do it, if God couldn't do it from afar, what makes you think you can? God came near. Emmanuel, God with us. That it wasn't until God put himself in the form of Jesus that we got it. The Word became flesh and dwelt in us, among us. So if you think you can do this from somewhere else, you're mistaken. God didn't even do it from somewhere else. I think I'm going to stop here because I'm a preacher, as you can tell. And take questions. I got about 15 more slides. Y'all don't have no questions?
I know you do some work with Bob Luncheon. Can you talk about gentrification with justice? Expand on that just a little bit. Because obviously it's going to happen, and in some ways there's some positives of it. So I guess it's kind of unpack that a little bit.
Bob has coined this term, gentrification with justice. So this idea that, yes, gentrification is a norm, but it doesn't have to be something that wrecks the lives of poor people around us, or people struggling in neighborhoods and communities that are being overtaken with gentrification. So gentrification with justice means that you and I think strategically about a neighborhood and the people who are without resource in their neighborhood, so that when gentrification happens, there are systems in place that keep families intact. So things like housing, right? Things like jobs and economic development for people that live there already. So we have this organization called Caris Community Housing. And what Caris does is they'll go into a neighborhood quietly before speculators and real estate folks get wind that this neighborhood might change, and they buy up land quietly. And they buy it up inexpensively. And so by the time this wave hits, they'll own a number of lots in the neighborhood and begin to build housing for people living there already to become homeowners. Work with people to get them creditworthy so that they can become homeowners. So before this happens, you have this idea that as a kingdom, folks, we're going to work underneath the radar, and we're going to buy land, and we're going to do some real estate deals, and we're going to have all of this in place so that when this neighborhood comes up, it's going to come up. Not only are you going to be like middle class, wealthy, and poor people in this neighborhood, it's also going to stay diverse, right? Because we're going to keep, a lot of these neighborhoods are majority African American, Latino, and we're going to keep some other people here. And so it's like, what does missions look like in that perspective, right? It looks like you need a real estate developer. It looks like you know somebody down at City Hall who understands lease and land deals. And need somebody who knows urban planning and who's working in urban planning, or either helps us understand how the city will develop. So as the kingdom, we can get ahead of that curve and get something that's fair and just for the people that live there. So missions no longer is just, that's the other thing. Missions no longer is just the pastor in the pulpit or just the missionaries. It's everybody in that congregation. Whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a real estate developer, like, you should be thinking about the kingdom and what you do and how we can represent Jesus in this. Sorry, man, I'm long here. Oh, I thought you had questions. Other questions?
So then how does the role of the pastor change in the local church if the church becomes the missionary in its community?
Very good. I like that question. The pastor no longer, well, I'm sorry. So, I move a lot. The pastor is no longer the central figure of a church, right? When we go down further, I didn't have time, but if you go down into Romans and dive down into it, what does Paul start to get into? The gifts of the body. And he starts to talk about how there is a gift of pastoring, there's a gift of leadership, there's a gift of administration and hospitality and all these things. So the pastor now becomes a person focused on people and focused on developing people so that their gifts can get out in the community. So Sunday morning no longer is the major hour. Like, we've been talking about this for who knows how long, right? Why do people only see their Christianity on Sunday morning? Because they have been trained and given ideas about other ways for their Christianity to be worked out. So a pastor becomes a facilitator. Oh, this kid is a real estate agent. How, like, as I'm teaching and training him, I'm teaching and training him how to be a good urban minister, a good community person. There's also this other thing that Christians are the worst neighbors in the world. Because they spend most of their time in church, within the building, on Sundays and Wednesdays and whatever special days. I don't know, I grew up in church and there was a special day all the time. Like, church was just a special day, 365. Sorry. I'm a pastor and I love the church. All right? Did everybody hear me say that? Leroy Barber is a pastor. I've been on tape. But I love it so much. I want us to be, it's like, I want it to be in the mix of this. Because people are ready. The world is aching, looking for it. How are we going to get jobs? What is, like young people are, if anybody read Unchristian, you know, like, young people are saying, forget this, man. I'm going to go and serve Jesus outside of this church thing. Outside of this local church thing. Pastors are very important in this process. Plant some churches. Have 30 churches in my neighborhood. Only one, one I planted is like living, and I know the names of most of the people who live in the neighborhood. Planted church. I only got 20 people in that Methodist church anyway. We got to look at ourselves, man. We got to laugh at ourselves, because some of what we do is just funny.
What's the process been like for you as a pastor to help train your congregation to stray away from the traditional norms of thinking when it comes to church and to a more communal or community-centered aspect?
That's cool. That's a good question. One of the things we do is we do what we call community house gatherings. So on every block, we have a member of our church living on every block. And purposely, as people came to our church and they were looking to move to our neighborhood, we were like, hey, why don't you think about this block? Or why don't you think about that block? And so now we got somebody on every block going down the entire community for a mile or so. And so we do these community house gatherings during the week. Any night of the week, you can have it. We train the leaders, and you invite your neighbors over. We come for a meal, sit down and pray, have a Bible study, whatever the expression of that block is. And so everybody sees themselves as a minister, like as doing something in the neighborhood. Because your community house gathering is an expression of the body of Christ on your block. So that's one thing we do.
Like you mentioned the church issue, or how churches are still a place where monoculturalism is very present. And it seems like a lot of neighborhoods kind of work this way too, that neighborhoods don't tend to stay biracial, multiracial for long. It's like usually they tend to kind of sort themselves out. What are some ways do you think as a church that we can practically like promote this this kind of reconciliation in the community and also in the church?
One of the ways I think is the church is still a place where everybody comes. So, if you're able to be in a community and reach out to that community, it's a place where whether you're wealthy or poor, or you're black or white, you can find a common spot. And if you're able to do that effectively, you begin to nail down and solidify those relationships within Christendom. So as I'm out and I see my neighbor out at the market, that person, I connect with them at church, or I connect with them in a community house gathering. It's a different relationship that develops. And so that's kind of the way we're trying to unfold. Of course, I mean we're not perfect. We've messed up a lot, but that's one of the ways we're trying to do it.
I'm going to break in here. We're going to take a pause, really, because Leroy has talked about everyday mission from 1 to 150. He's going to talk about evangelism in the hood. So we need to stop for just a few minutes, give Leroy a chance to catch his breath. If you'd like to stay and hear the second lecture, please feel free to do that. If you have to go, this is the time to do that. Let's take